Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Sap, there was a big boxing match this weekend between Bud Crawford and I'm forgetting the other guy's name, but I watched that. But the best fight of the weekend actually may not have been inside of the boxing ring in Las Vegas. It was on an NBA court, believe it or not, as Isaiah Stewart of the Pistons and LeBron James, your guy from the Lakers, got in. It was sort of a melee is the best way to describe it, with blood and people security, and man, it was wild. Sap, what were your initial thoughts viewing all of this?
Well, Isaiah Stewart clearly lost his mind, and I don't know if I could necessarily blame him. He's 20 years old. He was trying to be physical with LeBron James. He's a big, young, strong player who plays with a lot of energy. The Lakers are down 12. I think LeBron's frustrated the way the season has gone, that things aren't coming together for the Lakers. And, they were on the, waiting a free throw, and they kind of tussled, and LeBron with his elbow forearm kind of turned to try to shrug off Isaiah Stewart. And what happened was the side of his fist ended up hitting him in the eye, causing a gash and a lot of blood coming down. Now, look, I'm extremely sensitive to my eyes. I'm not putting myself in the situation of, battling LeBron James or Isaiah Stewart. But if I saw blood near my eye, I might freak out too. But then by the third or fourth time that he was restrained, I think it was time to calm down and move on. And I think LeBron apologized to him. Was it intentional?
Yes.
Yeah. Probably was. Now, here's the thing. When we talk about LeBron James, no matter what, I mean, if he sneezes, people are going to have different opinions on that sneeze meant. So there's the Rashomon effect. You know what that is, right?
Great movie.
Right?
Kurosawa.
See, what
everybody has a different story to tell, right? That's the Rashomon effect.
That's the Rashomon effect. That goes through life in general. So you're a LeBron guy like I am. You're going to look and say, well, LeBron, really didn't do anything. The guy's, face just happened to be in the way of where his fist was. And then if you hate LeBron, like say Skip Bayless, I wouldn't say you hate LeBron. He's not your favorite player, but you're not afraid to criticize him. You would say, like Skip Bayless said on Undisputed, that LeBron essentially looked at Isaiah Stewart, cold cocked him, a la Mike Tyson or Bruce Lee. So, there's a wide range of what we all saw in that melee. Intentionally, I don't think he meant to bloody the guy. It just so happened that's what happened. And then Isaiah Stewart's reaction at a moment was freaking out because
it was insane.
It was, but then he took it too far. So now we've got the suspension. LeBron 1 game, Isaiah Stewart 2 games, which again, the LeBron haters say only LeBron James gets less of a suspension, and he's the guy that started it. But I mean, look, Isaiah Stewart's reaction was a bit over the top, shall we say. And LeBron's not considered a dirty player. He's in his 19th year. That was the first time he got a flagrant 2 in his entire career. It's only the second time he's been ejected. One other time was a couple of years ago when he yelled at a referee. So he's not considered a dirty player. Now, there was a play many years ago. I'm going back at least 30 years ago where Karl Malone, who was a dirty player and about the same size as LeBron James, absolutely destroyed Isaiah Thomas when Isaiah Thomas was going to the basket. Karl Malone, it was a blatant elbow to Isaiah Thomas's head. He got 1 game. So Karl Malone got 1 game for that. LeBron got 1 game for what he did to Isaiah Stewart, and Stewart gets 2 games. That's where we're at right now. But this would not be as big a story if it was some other player. Because
no,
it was,
of course not.
James was huge. In fact, only LeBron James could move the NFL behind him on a Sunday. Right, like the lead story on SportsCenter Sunday night wasn't about all the great games on Sunday and Bills being upset by the Colts or the Titans losing to the Texans, and now the Patriots are in first place and all of that kind of stuff, and the Cowboys losing to the Chiefs. The lead story is LeBron James was in a scuffle in Detroit, and the same thing on Monday. All the talk shows led with that. He's the only guy that could move the NFL to the second page, or
he's the most famous athlete on the planet.
Because it was him, it became huge, and it was just a weird situation because you get this 20-year-old guy who's like 17 years younger than LeBron James, trying to fight him, and then all the Lakers are coming to support LeBron. And basketball fights generally aren't really all that interesting because it's a lot of hold me back.
Yeah.
Although Isaiah Stewart looked like he wanted.
No, Isaiah Stewart wanted to throw down. He was going to throw down.
Yeah, a big man and a young guy, and he's aggressive, and LeBron doesn't want to fight, and that's why you've got other guys on the team to deal with that. You don't want the best player on your team, the best player in the league, throwing down punches, maybe potentially breaking the hand on someone's skull.
Right, of course not. No, I mean, as far as I look at it, I think the NBA got the suspensions right. I think that's more or less fair. 1 game for LeBron, I think is completely reasonable. I think 2 games for Isaiah Stewart is reasonable too, because ultimately Isaiah Stewart didn't actually end up hitting anybody. Had he done that, we'd be talking about a 10 to 20 game suspension. So right. 2, the fact that, I mean, had nobody, security and the police and team and coaches not held him back, I fully believe he was going to hit somebody. So they saved him from himself. But 2 games, considering what happened, I think it is fair. So I have no problem with it. I totally believe it was a dirty play and intentional by LeBron. I agree with you also, though. I don't think he has a reputation of being a dirty player, unlike his past teammate, Dwayne Wade, who skated on a lot of things and was completely a dirty player. But LeBron James has never had any reason to be a dirty player. He's bigger and faster and stronger than everybody else. Why does he have to add, dirty play into the mix? He never has. So I think, reputationally, 1 game is fair. He's only been ejected once. Yeah, like you said, once before in his career. This was his first flagrant 2 foul. But I do think it was completely out of frustration, and he sort of wound up a little bit and clocked Isaiah Stewart in the face because he was frustrated. So I don't describe
it as he clocked him in the face. Again, the best way I would describe it, and again, here we are to the Rushmon effect, is that he kind of tried to shrug him off with his elbow, then the forearm, and then the closed fist. The closed fist is the giveaway that it was intentional, because generally I don't think you're going to rebound with a closed fist or, whatever the case may be. And he did catch him on the side of the eye with the side of his fist. And again, we're talking about gigantic guys here. Isaiah Stewart is 6'9", 260, essentially the same size.
Yeah, they're about the same size.
About the same size. I think it's also a case LeBron's frustrated. I think he maybe feels mortal at this point, because for the 3rd time in 4 years, he's dealing with injuries, right? His first year in LA, there's the groin. His 3rd year in LA, it's the ankle. This year, it's the abdomen. He's going to be 37 next month. He's
100% out of frustration.
It's out of frustration. So this is a different situation.
There wasn't malice behind it. I don't think that.
It was. He could have avoided it, and I think he doesn't appear to me to be a dirty player or a guy that I think he probably felt bad after the case because the kid was bleeding.
Profusely.
He was
a lot. Yeah.
He really was. I mean, it almost looked like there'd been some sort of capsule that, just dissolved on his face and started to bleed. It was like, geez, that's pretty stunning. As far as the suspension, the weird thing is, look, I think the 1 game suspension is fine. The only problem is the NBA is kind of hurting its own business model, because he's playing, or he's supposed to play, at Madison Square Garden tonight. The only visit the Lakers have to Madison Square Garden, the only visit for LeBron James into Madison Square Garden. Could you start to enact something where the suspension gets served at home, right? So, like, if you're a New York Knicks fan and you spent a ton of money for tickets tonight to see LeBron James and the Lakers, well, you're not seeing LeBron James because of the suspension. Maybe you enforce the suspension when the Lakers return home, or when they play the Pistons again, which I believe is later this week.
Yeah.
In LA, maybe have him sit that game, have Isaiah Stewart sit that game as part of his suspension, and another game. I mean, people aren't buying tickets to see Isaiah Stewart. I get that. They are buying tickets to see LeBron James. So maybe that's something you could do. But again, the look of that would be, well, we're treating our star players differently. Like,
totally.
He gets suspension. That just happens to be the next game. I mean, Tom Brady got a 4-game suspension in 2016. They suspended him whether the games were on the road or at home. So you have to be fair to all the players. But in the NBA, because of load management, and oftentimes we miss the stars playing in certain arenas, that sucks for Knicks fans. It's on national TV tonight on TNT. The league needs as many ratings as they could get. Knicks, Lakers, LeBron James, that should be a marquee game. Well, he's not going to be there. It's his fault. He got suspended.
Believe me, Sep, the league didn't want to do it. If they kind of have their hand was forced. I mean, if they could have found a way into not suspending him, they would have done it. But the players would have been furious, I think, for the most part, if they had not suspended him.
Yeah, even the other star players would be like, well, if I did that, I would have got suspended.
Right.
I'm surprised there's not a mechanism in place like there is in other sports, mostly baseball,
An
where all
appeal
of a sudden
process.
you appeal the suspension and then you serve the suspension at home.
Right.
Just
I believe there's an appeal process in football too, where the suspension
yeah,
gets delayed, right? While
right.
the appeal is under review. Yeah, I've never seen that in the NBA. So my guess is they don't have that mechanism. Had there been, it wouldn't have really mattered. LeBron James was serving a game, come hook or crook, because
Right.
the way the NBA has doled out these suspensions is if you hit somebody in the face, typically they're suspending you a game. That's just how it's gone. They're trying to be very protective of their players, rightfully so.
And this goes back to David Stern, who ruled the league with an iron fist for nearly 30 years, right? So I'm sure there were no appeals process with David Stern. I mean, he would, fine owners regularly, mostly Mark Cuban, and there was no recourse for Mark Cuban. So yeah, no, he deserves the suspension. I just think for the good of the league, it would have been better if the suspension would be served while they were at home.
Yeah,
And
the timing is bad. I get that.
Later in the week. I mean, there's an opportunity to just say both of you guys shouldn't even be in the arena that night, cool off so that there's no repercussions. I don't know if Isaiah Stewart is still on the hunt for LeBron James. He seems to be really irritated by.
He tried to go all the way through the building. He took off in a dead sprint around the tunnels so he could get around the entire building to get to LeBron James. Like, he lost his mind. And,
he did.
And listen, I've seen this before when people see their own blood, they freak out and they just stop listening to all reason and logic. That's obviously what happened here, but that's not an excuse. I mean, you can't do that. LeBron James deserves, criticism for, for starting it, but you can't act like that. Isaiah Stewart, you can't act like that, whether you're playing on the playground or, as a professional. That's just, you can't say, okay, I'm calm now, and then try to bum rush somebody. That's just completely
it was like
inappropriate.
Out of WWE, right? I mean, he decides to go up the tunnel behind the stands and then come through the other tunnel to seek out LeBron James.
That was crazy. He was acting crazy.
I mean, maybe while he's serving the suspension, he should go play for the Lions. They haven't won a game this year. They're playing on Thanksgiving against the Bears. I mean, just picture him as a defensive end. He might help.
Tied a game.
They tied a game. That's true. That's true. And they're competitive in a lot of the games. Dan Campbell leading the way, biting kneecaps. But yeah, maybe have Isaiah Stewart as the new defensive end for the Detroit Lions. It would come in handy there. But I don't know. Is this now, of course, the whole next group of debates are, well, no one would dare, go after Michael Jordan because people feared Michael Jordan. They don't fear LeBron James. That led to a really good debate on First Take this morning with Stephen A. Smith and JJ Redick, who is now working for ESPN, and that's a great hire by them. And JJ Redick is like, no, we feared LeBron James as being a great player. I think what Stephen A. Smith was trying to say in that is that Michael Jordan was a sociopath. So people didn't really want to fuck with him, whereas LeBron isn't a sociopath. He's basically a nice guy. But I will only push back and say, I don't think the Detroit Pistons, the bad boys Pistons, were really frightened of Michael Jordan as they
were hacking
postseason and beat him in 3 postseasons. I don't think the Celtics of the mid 80s, who eliminated the Bulls 3 straight years, were really scared shit of Michael Jordan. Other than the fact he was a great player, I don't think they feared him like this guy's going to take our heart out until he finally won a championship. The Celtics and Pistons owned Michael Jordan. And I think that's what JJ Redick was pushing back on, as if to say, Stephen A., you're living in a, not in reality with this. And Jordan, we know, is sociopath. LeBron's not. I kind of get that point, but let's everybody makes it. This is why, again, somehow this has turned into LeBron versus Michael Jordan. Cause you know what, every time it does, it's like Michael Jordan only played 6 years apparently, right? In the NBA, the 6 years he won the titles, the other year, he wasn't playing, the years that he got bounced in the first round when he was with the Bulls against the Celtics, or losing in the second round of the conference championship to the Pistons, or his 2 years in Washington. Apparently he didn't play in those seasons. He played 6 years. Great. He won 6 championships in 6 years. The other 11 years he played, I guess, didn't matter.
I will say this, I'm a Jordan over LeBron guy, and will be probably for the rest of my life, unless LeBron wins a couple more rings here, then I'll revisit it. But for now, Jordan over LeBron.
My goal on this show is to convince you by the time I die,
not gonna work
too far away, that I'm going to try to make you say that LeBron's better than Michael Jordan. That's my goal in life.
It's a tall task, but
it is.
I will say this: in a vacuum, if I had to fight somebody, I would much rather fight Michael Jordan than LeBron James. I'm sorry. If the idea that like LeBron James is like just soft. LeBron James is, like you said, 6'9", 250, 260.
Right.
That's like trying to fight a brick wall. There's no way in hell I'm trying to fight LeBron James. If I see Michael Jordan, if like my life depended on, they're like, you have to fight one of these two people. I'm like, Jordan, not LeBron. He's so much bigger than Michael Jordan. Why would you ever choose LeBron over Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the only thing is I think they think Jordan might pick up a stool and hit you over the head with it. Because again,
take that out of it. I'm saying in terms of like physique.
Yeah, it's like who in their right mind wanted to fight Will Chamberlain?
Don't fight the guy is built like Superman. Right, that's not what I'm going to do.
6'9", 260 with about 5% body fat. Not the best guy to fight. And again, I think he's a gentle giant. I think that's been part of the criticism is he doesn't have that mean streak that Jordan or Kobe or Bird, those guys had, that he's just kind of a nice guy. And that, I think only because he's so much bigger and stronger than everybody, like Will Chamberlain. That was the knock against Will Chamberlain for years. It's like, he doesn't want to hurt anyone. If you piss them off, and we saw that the Golden State Warriors pissed LeBron off in the 2016 finals, you get the best of LeBron, because I don't think anyone's ever played a better 3-game stretch in the finals than LeBron did in games 5, 6, and 7 in 2016. You can't really play any better than that. So that's why oftentimes people don't push him too far, because they don't want to wake him up. But I think the whole thing of this is that he just felt mortal out there, that the team's down 12. They're playing 500 or sub 500 basketball. They're losing by 12 to the freaking Pistons after losing by 30 to the Celtics 2 nights earlier. They're like, they can't seem to find themselves, and he's getting frustrated. So this young kid who's trying to be physical with him and not intimidated by him pushed the wrong buttons, and LeBron kind of lost it. But then Isaiah Stewart lost it, 20 times more than LeBron?
Yeah, he did. He did completely. It was insane. I mean, that's the only word to describe it, is that his reaction to it was insane. And he needs, if I'm on the Pistons, because he's a promising young player, really high recruit coming out of Washington, had a really good rookie year for them last year and is playing well this year. So hopefully he'll be a part of the Pistons for a long time to come. They need to get him to work with some sort of counselor or anger management, because that's not a normal reaction.
No, and don't you think other players around the league are watching that, saying this guy's got a very short fuse? We can really get him off his game if we just
except for they have to be like, is he going to try to kill me if I do something?
That's true. It is the NFL. It's the NBA. It's not the NHL. The NHL, he'd be like the perfect enforcer, right? Or on the NFL, he'd be like
there might be some players looking at me like, I'm not going to mess with this guy. He will literally try to kill me.
Although the perfect guy to try to defend LeBron was Russell Westbrook, another lunatic, right? So he was the perfect guy to get in the middle of that, because he's not wrapped too tight either.
Yeah, but it was interesting because it was one of the actual legitimate fracases in the NBA where somebody did want to legitimately throw down versus, like you said, mostly it's the hold me back sort of BS. But this was Isaiah Stewart was dead set on trying to kill LeBron James. I don't know. Yep. He was not seeing clearly. It wasn't just the blood streaming down his eyes that was making him not see clearly. It was a crazy response, but unusual to see that in the NBA.
Yeah. Maybe he just didn't like Space Jam.
Maybe, very possible. Maybe he's a Jordan guy and doesn't appreciate LeBron, all the talk about LeBron. So moving on to the Pistons are bad, but another really bad team, Sap, are the Sacramento Kings. And they have said, okay, we've had it with you, Luke Walton, and they become the first team to fire a head coach this season. He gets replaced with Alvin Gentry, who has, plenty of head coaching experience in the NBA. He is the interim coach now. He was the assistant coach. The Kings are 6-12 this year. For some unknown reason, their owner, Vivek Randive, thinks that every year they should be in the playoff mix, even though they don't ever have a really good roster. And I believe, Sap, they've had 11 coaches over the past 10 years.
That seems about right.
which is insane. So
20
first,
years, right? Can you make a case that the Sacramento Kings are the worst franchise in the NBA?
Yes, definitely. You can make
I
a
think
strong
that
case.
discussion, because now the Knicks are on the upswing, made the playoffs last year. The Cavaliers are doing a nice job. I mean, without LeBron James, they've been irrelevant, but this year the Cavaliers are doing a nice job. Like there's some hope in those places. Even Minnesota, had a decent run in 2004 when they made the conference finals, and they've had the first pick in the draft, and it appears they've selected the right guys. I mean, Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. So like even these really suck-ass franchises at least have some hope.
Yeah,
Sacramento,
it's Sacramento, New Orleans, or Minnesota are your only options, in my opinion. And I think Sacramento has the longest playoff drought, so go with them.
It's got to be 18 to 19 years without making the playoffs, which is difficult to do in the NBA. And at least New Orleans, you had Anthony Davis, and they got Zion. So hopefully he comes back at some point. Yeah, so it's really, really bad. I mean, and you look at Luke Walton, who was a disaster with the Lakers. He was there 4+ years, 131 and 189. In Sacramento, 37 and 52. That's last year and this year. And as you said, Alvin Gentry is taking over for him, and it's just going to be a placeholder. I'm set. I just think that one of the biggest reasons that the Sacramento Kings have remained irrelevant. Let's go back to the 2018 draft, Jet. Sacramento had the second pick in the draft. We know that DeAndre Ayton was the first pick by Phoenix. Good pick, not a great pick, but you take the big man who I think is going to have a really nice career. Sacramento with the second pick took Marvin Bagley III, when you could have either selected Luka Doncic or Trae Young.
Yeah, that hurts.
That hurts, right? That's a disaster. I mean, that's essentially, I mean, maybe not to the same level of Portland taking Sam Bowie instead of Michael Jordan. I'm not saying Luka's Michael Jordan, but Luka someday could be the best player in basketball. And Marvin Bagley III doesn't even look like he's interested in basketball. I mean, in his career, he's averaged 14 and 7, which is, nothing to, be excited about. So that's when things have really gone bad, when they had that opportunity with the second pick to get a franchise type player like Luka. Like if you put Luka and De'Aaron Fox on a team, now you've got something, right? You're building something there. And maybe you can even recruit a really good coach who'd be interested in that team. Who the hell wants to coach in Sacramento with kind of a crazy owner and a market that's not very good? It could be good because if you remember late 90s, early 2000s.
The fans were great then, yeah.
Great, yeah. I mean, you had, contending teams just couldn't break through the Lakers. So I think you look at that, not being able to get Luka Doncic or Trae Young in the 2018 draft Instead, you take Marvin Bagley III. That's a big thing, and this franchise is irrelevant. So,
without a doubt,
yeah, he probably has a job the rest of the year, and then they'll go find some other guy.
Here, Sap, since 2012, Keith Smart lasted 1 year, Mike Malone 1 year, Ty Corbin 1 year, George Karl 1 year, Dave Yeager bucked the trend 3 years, Luke Walton 2 years, and now Alvin Gentry. That's terrible. That's so bad. You can't run a franchise like that where everybody's coaching for one season.
No, that's about it. I mean, what is this? Like, it sounds like a reality show. Okay, coach the Kings for 1 year, see how you do, and we'll bring in someone else the next year. Yeah, it's a disaster. I mean, where do they go from here? You've got a nice player in De'Aaron Fox. Buddy Hield, maybe you move him and get something in return. But what exactly are you getting? There's just... Again, they had that opportunity with the second overall pick in 2018, and they screwed it up. They did. I mean,
massive. That's why we talked about this, I think, in past drafts. And I think we talked about it at the time when we were working together at the Herald or wherever we were working together at the time, when the Celtics were picking that high. When you have the opportunity to pick extremely high in the draft, like top 3, you can't botch it. You can't. If you do, it really sets you back. The only reason the Cavaliers recovered from that Anthony Bennett horrible pick at number 1 is because LeBron James came back a couple years later. Otherwise, they were never going to be competitive.
Yeah, that was a weird draft. I mean, the middle of that draft was better than the front of the draft because Giannis was 15th in that draft, right? So clearly the best player of the 2013 draft. I believe Anthony Bennett went first, and was Oladipo second?
Yeah.
Who's turned out to be probably the second or third best player in that draft. Shows you that it wasn't really a good draft other than, of course, Giannis. And then I believe Thompson went to Cleveland with the 4th pick in 2013. I'm pretty sure that
Tristan Thompson. Yeah.
Tristan, I think, went 4th. They had like the 1st and the 4th pick. And then, of course, they had Kyrie the year before. So they were building up that draft capital. And Kyrie was the right guy to pick 1st overall. We know how talented he is. And then they were able to get LeBron back. Yeah, but Anthony Bennett had an incredibly short career for the 1st overall pick. Yeah, when you get one of the top 3 picks, you got to nail it. Give Danny Ainge credit for that. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, perfect. Really, really great picks. He hasn't done so well in the middle of the 1st round, and that's why he no longer is in the employ of the Boston Celtics. But they're not going to recover from this, because every time you see Luka Doncic, score 32 points with 12 rebounds and 11 assists, and Mavericks are winning, if you're a Sacramento Kings fan, you're like, we could have had him with the 2nd pick in 2018. Instead, we've got Marvin Bagley III, who I think would rather be a rap singer than a basketball player.
He'd rather be anywhere but Sacramento. He'd rather be playing in the G League than Sacramento.
Yeah.
So no one wants to be there. So they're never going to get free agents either. So that's right. An issue too. And yeah, their owner is constantly meddling. It's a mess there, but take all that aside, Luke Walton has done a terrible job. It's not like he's done deserved to keep his job.
No.
And I think between the Lakers disaster, like you said, in this, like, it's pretty clear he doesn't have what it takes to be a head coach in the NBA, at least right now. And his reputation was built purely off of Steve Kerr had the back injury, right? So he couldn't coach for a little while for the Warriors, and the Warriors ripped off 20 straight wins when Luke Walton was the interim coach. And suddenly people were like, oh yeah, Luke Walton's a really good coach. Well, that team was incredibly loaded. I mean, I don't think Luke Walton had to do all that much.
Is he bringing Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green with him? In 2000.
Right, but wasn't that's where he got his reputation, right? It was purely off of that.
The first half of that year, I believe they were 39-2 while he was coaching them.
That's again, a crazy record.
I probably could have coached them, because you had Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Andre Iguodala. I mean, they had a perfect team there. This is the year before Durant went there, but they were still loaded talent-wise, and that's the year they went 73-9. So, yeah, people are like, wow, this guy must be a great coach. Well, yeah, it's Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. That makes you a great coach. They don't have those guys in Sacramento. They didn't really have those guys in L.A. either, other than his first year there when LeBron showed up, and it was kind of like a mishmash of other players. So, yeah,
LeBron didn't want him there. He LeBron didn't. So,
and he may not want his current coach there either, Frank Vogel, because Luke Walton being the first guy to get fired this year pretty quickly. I mean, we're not even into Thanksgiving, and we've got one casualty among the coaches. Like, who's the next one to go? Who's
that's a good question.
That gets fired? What do you think?
I'm looking at the standings right now, because that's all you can really base who would get fired off of. It's got to be an underperforming team. So looking in the Eastern Conference, the teams that have been pretty poor to start, you kind of expected to be poor, like Orlando and Detroit. So I feel like their coaches are safe, though. Dwayne Casey, I suppose, could get fired, though I feel like they like him as a sort of a mentor to these younger players. So I'd be a little bit surprised. It's a tough question, Sap. I could totally see it being Frank Vogel, but I don't think it would make a difference. I don't think he coaches the team anyways. It would be a sacrificial lamb.
It would be. And I think if Jason Kidd was still there as an assistant, that could speed up the process of having Frank Vogel fired. Won the championship 2 years ago. They were really not a factor last year with the Anthony Davis and LeBron injuries. Right now they're 9-9. I think he's on the hot seat because the head coach of the Lakers is always on the hot seat, and the head coach of the team that has LeBron James is always on the hot seat. I'll throw Steve Nash out there, even though Brooklyn has the best record in the Eastern Conference at 13-5, and they're doing it without Kyrie Irving. Maybe they're doing it because they don't have Kyrie Irving, but there's immense pressure on Steve Nash, right? Like, at some point, Kevin Durant or James Harden, or if Kyrie comes back and they go to management, ownership, and say, I think it's time to move on from Steve Nash, I would assume they'll move on from Steve Nash at that point.
Yeah, they'll do whatever they say. Yeah, they don't care.
They say. I'm going to throw one other name out to you, and it's a coach who has a team that 2 years ago made the conference finals, got bounced in the second round last year, Mike Malone at Denver. And because they've kind of underperformed this year, they're 9-8. I know they don't have Jamal Murray, but they do have the reigning MVP in
or Michael Porter.
And they have Michael. He's hurt too, but he hasn't developed the way we expected him to develop. And I just wonder what the relationship is with Nikola Jokic and Mike Malone. I don't know what it is. I just remember watching a game last year when the Celtics blitzed them in the fourth quarter.
Right.
And they were 15 and ended up winning by 15. The Celtics get involved in more of those games than any team I've ever seen. Well, the Lakers do too, where at one moment they're down 15 and then they're up 15, or they're up 15 and they're down 15. There's these huge sways. And it just looked like Jokic wanted nothing to do with Mike Malone. So I'm just throwing that out there, that would be a fairly big name on a fairly prominent team, that I wouldn't be shocked if that happened at some point, if they still play 500 ball, even though they don't have Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. is out, and they have some excuses, but what happens when a team underachieves, the coach goes.
Yeah, that is, I mean, I would be pretty surprised because, he's considered one of the better coaches in NBA circles. And, you would have to, if you're the Nuggets, feel very confident one of your assistant coaches or, a guy who's going to become available in the next cycle that you feel like is considerably better. But yeah, they have underachieved a little bit. I mean, they're 9-8 though. Remember last year, they also got off to a very slow start and they played very well down the stretch. They will be getting Jamal Murray back at some point this year. It looks like Michael Porter Jr. might be done for the year with another back issue, which is not good because he's had several back issues. I think already 2 back surgeries and he's like 22. So that's not good. But sorry, go ahead, Sep.
Very talented player. But I think what happens too with all of this, Jed, is now you look back a year ago, Atlanta was floundering. They decided to make a move and put Nate McMillan as their head coach, bumped him up from an assistant coach's position, and they took off and made it all the way to the conference final. So now owners and general managers like, hey, we can't really make a big deal at the trade deadline, but what we can do is change coaches, and maybe that's going to be the thing that turns us around. Because Nate McMillan, I thought, could have been coach of the year last year. I mean, they won 70% of their games when they changed coaches and made it all the way to the conference final. So I'm sure every other team is like, maybe that's our way out of mediocrity.
Yeah, but, in that situation, Nate McMillan is a guy that, I think a lot of people looked at as a guy who probably should have still been a head coach instead of an assistant coach. Yep. And so they had a guy on the bench who was, ready to take over. And maybe Alvin Gentry does a good job in Sacramento, and that helps them. I don't think so.
Got the machine there. So who are the assistant coaches currently on the Denver Nuggets? So if they decide to move on from Mike Malone, in theory, they'll pick one of their assistant coaches to take over. I think they'll do it differently than Minnesota did last year, which they fired their coach and then got a coach from another organization to come in, give him a long contract, which that makes no sense. Just promote someone from within for the rest of the year, see what happens, and then make that judgment afterwards. And again, it doesn't always happen the way it happened in Atlanta last year with Nate McMillan. I mean, he took over and he preached defense, right? And that got them over the top, and they went all the way to the conference finals. But I don't know if they're ready-made coaches on that Denver coaching staff. You let me know.
No one who has had any head coaching experience. They have David Edelman, who I think might be Rick Edelman's son.
Okay.
Popeye Jones played a little bit for the Celtics, a little bit in the NBA. Nobody who has head coaching experience, though.
Yeah, so that makes it more difficult unless they just promote someone like Popeye Jones, who's a former player who may have some cachet. I'm just saying that's one team to look for, but you're right. The built-in excuse is Michael Porter Jr. probably out for the year, and when does Jamal Murray come back? Those are two big.
So you got to look at, looking at the bottom of the standings here, Sap, and just, quickly go through it before we wrap up here. Like Houston, everybody expected them to suck. They're not going to fire their coach. That's just, the Pelicans, same sort of thing. They're on, and plus they just hired their new coach. So they're not going to, Zion hasn't been there. They're not going to fire him. Obviously the Spurs have been bad. Greg Popovich has a job for life. He's not getting fired. The Thunder have overachieved a little bit. The Timberwolves probably overachieved a little bit. Okay, so let's go back. Let's go into the Eastern Conference then. The Magic, everybody expected them to suck. Same with the Pistons, though. Dwayne Casey's been there a couple of years. Maybe they're getting impatient. That's why I mentioned him. The Pacers are they just hired Rick Carlisle back. They've been a little disappointing to start the year because they've been pretty good the past couple of years, and now they're third to last in the Eastern Conference, but I kind of don't feel like they're going to give up on Rick Carlisle this quickly. The Raptors and the Hawks. The Raptors aren't going to get rid of Nick Nurse. and the Hawks aren't going to get rid of Nate McMillan. And then the Cavaliers have overachieved. The Knicks, they're not going to get rid of Tom Thibodeau. And then, the rest of the teams are above 500.
Out to you, this would be obviously a surprise. He's a marquee coach, big brand, one of the highest paid coaches in the NBA. What if Ben Simmons wants to come back to Philadelphia, but he wants the 76ers to move on from Doc Rivers?
I think the Sixers would be okay with moving on from Doc Rivers, but it would have to be if Joel Embiid wanted to move on from Doc Rivers.
Right. Yeah, he would be the decider.
Ben Simmons has no juice left in that organization.
Well, unless he sits down and they say, okay, what's your biggest issue? He goes, I don't want to play for Doc Rivers, and Embiid's not crazy about Doc Rivers. And Daryl Morey, I don't believe, hired Doc Rivers. I think Doc Rivers came before Daryl Morey. So I'm just throwing that out there. I don't think it's going to happen. But sometimes when a team gets desperate and they look at the standings and say, well, how the hell are we going to catch Brooklyn or Milwaukee? They're the two best teams in the conference. Maybe by changing coaches, we shake things up. I mean, Philly's underachieved because Embiid's been out for 2.5 weeks with COVID. That's obviously going to have a huge impact. He's one of the best players in the league. But just some names that you could throw out there that may lose their job now that the first coach has been fired, and Luke Walton.
Yeah. No, I think that, we usually get probably 2 or 3 in the middle of the season a year. And, this is an early one, but it's not a surprising one with Luke Walton at all. So I'll be interested to see who goes next, but I don't think that there's a clear answer. But as games continue to pile up and records continue to get worse, the answer might become far more clear.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are presented by Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out their website. Make sure you check out our socials at John Sap25, at Jet Stryer. See the show on YouTube, youtube.com/Jet Stryer, or you download it wherever podcasts are found. We'll be back with another edition of the show before Thanksgiving, so we don't have to wish you a happy holiday quite yet. So stay tuned for the next show, and we will talk to you guys all later. Thanks for listening. See ya.